welcome to my sunroom chat. Today I will present my fourth and final movie on the self-induction of force fields. I urge you to view the other three movies in the 19 series if you haven't done so. I will begin this discussion by examining the final stages of self-induction, and I end it with a brief discussion of the sources of energy that drive the self-induction process. In this illustration, orange is symbolic for the billions of electric strings retracting against the surface of the electron, and the dark lines represent the magnons retracting back against the electron. Meanwhile, billions of gravitons also retract and squeeze the electron, which maintains the electron as two spheres. The electron is creating p-elons on one sphere and n-elons on the other sphere. Because the strings are created on opposite spheres, the complementary strings bond and surround the electron as they retract. They create an inward pressure on the electron in the same manner as bonded complementary magnons. Let me recap the main points. The retraction of elons, magnons, and gravitons constrict the electron into an ever smaller particle. The constriction of the electron causes it to eject virtual particles. Eventually, the electron becomes extremely small and dense, and it can no longer create virtual elastic strings. Let's review this in another manner. The electron at the beginning of a string cycle is maximum in size with least internal pressure as shown here. However, new strings fully surround the electron and they begin squeezing. As the strings retract, the internal pressure quickly reaches a critical point and all the portals are forced open and each portal fires off one virtual particle. Thus, one virtual particle is created per portal per round. In this manner, the number of strings is determined by the number of portals for a given type of string. After a portal ejects a virtual particle, it snaps shut and remains closed until retracting strings again create sufficient internal pressure to fire off another round. Finally, there comes a point when the strings cannot increase the internal pressure and the electron stops ejecting new virtual particles. The electron in this condition is symbolized here as a small black electron. This electron might be the densest material that can possibly be imagined, even denser than a black hole. Well, perhaps that's an overstatement. At this point, the old strings are completely absorbed inside the electron, and the electron quickly expands to its former full size. We are now back at the beginning of the string cycle. I will attempt to recap the main points. The strings are created in waves as the electron constricts in size. Perhaps 100 individual rounds occur, and in each round all the portals open, then snap shut after they eject a virtual particle. Finally, the electron becomes extremely dense, stops creating new virtual particles, and the old strings are completely absorbed. The electron expands rapidly, but is surrounded by new strings, now ready for a new string cycle. A new string cycle takes place about every 10 to the 13th power every second, as shown by diatomic molecules. And that is a lot of times. Let me emphasize a couple of points. The size of an elon portal is minute compared to the surface area of an electron. Thus, billions of elon portals need only take up a small percentage of the electron's surface. At the end of one string cycle, there may be only 100 magnons ejected from the poles, but there are a vast number of elon portals, and consequently, we can expect a vast number of elon strings. Now I would like to address this question. What is the source of energy that drives the self-induction process? Scientists have long believed the spin angular momentum helps to drive the cycle, but there has to be another more significant source of energy that has long baffled scientists. Virtual elastic string theory solves this completely. I have summarized my thoughts in the next slide. When a virtual particle is ejected from an electron, photon, or quark, the particle transfers its energy to the virtual elastic string it stretches out through space. The potential energy stored in the virtual elastic string is the main source of energy that drives the self-inducing process. But there is one other major source of energy that drives the string cycle. Scientists have long thought that spin angular momentum was important to the self-induction of force fields. Now we see one reason why this is true. Spin angular momentum helps to reel in the gravitons that wind up on the electron as they retract back through their portals. In the case of photons, spin angular momentum is directly correlated with the speed of the elastic string cycle. I have more to say about this observation at a later time. This source of energy demands two essential elements. First, the strings must be composed of matter, and they must have strong elastic properties. Once this is recognized, the rest is easy. Now, since this model for self-induction of force fields seems straightforward, you might wonder why this model has been ignored by scientists. Well, there are many reasons, but four of the most important are as follows. It requires force fields to have physical properties, which means they have to be composed of matter. It requires force fields to have strong elastic properties, a property vital for the self-induction process. It requires recognition that bonding between negative and positive electric fields results in a structure that cannot be detected by our instruments. Physicists call this interference when dealing with photons. It requires recognition that Einstein's concept of relativity cannot be true. Now that is the end of this discussion, except I have summarized my thoughts on self-induction of force fields, and they are presented on the next slide. Thank you. The electron string cycle is continuous and self-inducing. The elastic strings on one sphere bond with complementary strings on the opposite sphere. When they retract, they create an inward pressure on the electron. The external pressure created by the retracting strings condenses the electron until there is sufficient internal pressure to eject virtual particles. It ejects one virtual particle per portal per round. The number of portals determines the relative number of strings created. The size of the portal determines the kind of string. The large magnon portals are located at the poles, where the concentration of retracting strings is least dense. The smaller portals for elons are at the center of the spheres, where the retracting strings are more dense and where there is room for a vast number of small elon portals. The small portals for gravitons are at the marriage line of the two spheres, where we can expect the most dense concentration of retracting strings, and where N gravitons can immediately bond with S gravitons to create the neutral string we call a graviton. Even though the graviton only exists for 1 second, it exists through billions of string cycles, and for this reason they wind up around the spinning electron as they retract. This squeezes the electron into two spheres. Bipolar molecules tell us that the electron string cycle only encompasses about 10 to the minus 13 seconds. Thank you for attending my sunroom chat. What follows is a thought for you to consider and the address for my book that is free, along with the source of my movies that you can view in their logical order. Many years ago, a young girl, perhaps 8 years of age, ran from her playground at school and slipped a note to me while I was on a walk. The note was in a child's handwriting, and on a small piece of paper, the note had one word. The one word was smile. Perhaps we should all smile a little more often. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Bye for now.